Good evening. If you have a mobile phone, if you would like to put it on silent, please. Or turn it off before it cooks anything. Right, huge welcome to yet another new speaker. Asrupr Cyneaþsson with Odin and the Runes, Keys upon the Left-Hand Path. Arriving by the possibly controversial left-hand path, author of The Left Hand of Odin, Asrupr discusses concepts of free will, morality, runic magic and mythology, our potentials, and a practical introduction to the runes. Please welcome Asrupr.
Thank you, everyone, and thank you for coming out on this stormy evening. It's somewhat appropriate. It's almost like the wild hunt is blowing out there, and yeah, thank you for taking the effort to get out. Tonight even, we'll run through as Rob just said, and it'll be structured pretty much like this. So we'll have a brief look who or what is Odin, for those who are unfamiliar with Odin. We'll have a look at the left-hand path, again, just to make clear what that concept is about. That should hopefully align with a short break. And then we'll have a look at Norse mythology and the particular references that frame Odin within a left-hand path context. And then what I will end with is the application of the runes and how they are mystery keys that can be used as tools to guide self-development. So, one of the fundamental questions then of the topic is who or what is Odin? And when you run a Google search, you find that he is a Norse deity. Yeah, that's fairly accurate. You also find that he's a software tool for mobile phones, and of course a comic book character. And you get some fantastic images, some of which are perhaps more accurate than others. The one of Anthony Hopkins from the Marvel films is perhaps one of the more comical ones, pun intended. There's a bit of a strange depiction of Odin, very little resemblance to Odin within the mythology. So Odin within historical texts has many forms. Most common is essentially what drove Tolkien's depiction of Gandalf in the Lord of the Rings trilogy. It's a one-eyed man, old man typically with a beard, wearing a wide-brimmed hat, usually draped either in a dark grey cloak or a dark blue cloak. Generally, he will be found to be carrying a staff or a spear, which is Gungnir, and at times he has been seen to be riding his horse, a grey horse called Sleipnir. And one of the fundamental characteristics of any appearance of Odin is that he is generally involved in some form of espionage or deceit, and you can very often apply a sense of distrust to an appearance of Odin, whether or not he appears in the form of a peasant farmer, and if you disrespect him, ultimately that would be the demise of your army in the subsequent battle. So it's not always taken as given. He shifts shape and shifts appearance and name. Many names, over 50 different documented names by which Odin refers to himself. There are the occasional appearance towards the later end of the mythology where we will find Odin battle-clad and wearing shining armour, riding a horse, that generally depicts the forthcoming start of an epic battle in Scandinavia. And the last occurrence of that was only 300 years ago, where a general thought he saw Odin ride past the start of the battle line. Subsequently won the battle. Odin also, interestingly, as we'll get into in the mythology, is capable of taking animal form. And this is something that occurs within the sagas, and we'll look at in its relevance to the left-hand path. For those not too familiar with Norse mythology, this is essentially the pantheon of deity and cosmological alignment of those beings. Starting at the top with one of my favourites, which is Thundla, the cosmic cow, and the two proto-beings, Ymir on the left there, and Bor. Bori is an interesting being, as he was licked out of the salt rhinestones by Adumla, the cow. Ymir, the asexual being, gave birth to most of the Jotun, or the giants, of Norse mythology, out of his sweaty armpits, knees, elbows, various body parts. So you can see the lineage there of how Odin comes out of Buri and Besla, his mother, and his brothers Vili and Ve, or Honor and Lothar, depending on which aspect of the mythology you're reading. You also see off to the right there, you've got the Vanir gods descended from Njord, most commonly represented by Gullveig-Freyja and Freyja. You can also see everybody's favourite within a heathen context or a Norse mythological approach, Thor, as the son of Odin there as well. You also see, especially within a Marvel context, popular at the moment, Loki has descended there from the Jotun side, and the offspring of Loki, the beasts, the Sleipnirs, the Fafnir wolf, Hel, and Jormungand, which we will look at within their context as well. Odin has many etymological links as a name, most commonly Othin, Wotan, Woden, or Wothanas as the Proto-Germanic form. Wothanas is especially interesting, as at the root of that we find the word wode, which is a term that denotes inspiration. And this is especially appropriate for Odin, as it links with the inspiration of an artist, or even the battle rage of a berserker or a soldier in the heat of battle. Given Odin's aspects as a god of poetry and death, it's very much appropriate. And we find within the body of Norse mythology, one of the more interesting and early tales is that of Gylfagganing, perhaps even one of the most significant. It describes the coming into being of the gods and the alignment of the Norse cosmology that is Yggdrasil, the world tree. The tale sees Swedish king Gylfi venture to Asgard, the home of the Aesir gods, and he finds 3 thrones, positioned one above the other, with 3 beings on them. One introduces himself as high, one just as high, and one the third. Interestingly, third later explains the many names of Odin. As we see in the quote there, he's called the All-Father, who is the father of all the gods. Is the Valfather, father of the slain, associations with battle, is the hanging god, and he has many names, and later within the mythology it explains he's known by a different name around the world and takes many different forms. Within the tale itself, the suggestion, it's implied that Gylfi is actually in conversation with 3 forms of Odin, and each of the beings are a hypostasis of Odin himself, and not separate entities. Of course, that has Catholic resonance in this day and age, but it was there some 800 years ago when this was written down. So as I mentioned before, when we were looking at the Norse Pantheon, Odin has 2 brothers, Vili and Ve, or Honor and Lothar, depending on the source. And these are more commonly now thought of as being a trinity of hypostasis of Odin, so various forms that, almost in a Jungian psychological approach, create the being that we think of as Odin. And this may even have some associations on a Proto-Indo-European context with Shiva and the associations of Shiva and Vishnu within Brahma. The consciousness of Odin has consequences, that he is aware of his own limitations, and certainly his name etymologically is linked to consciousness through Wirthanas. Vili and Ve certainly link to aspects of will and the ability to discriminate between what is the self and what is other, thus forming a complete psychological approach to individuation. Obviously, it's important because only with knowledge of the self are you able to act with moral certainty, and this is something that throughout the mythology Odin is certainly able to do so, regardless of social context and morality that surrounds him and the views of the other gods and deity upon those. Within the mythology, what we find are the sons of Bor, Odin, Vili and Ve. They structured the manifest realm from the remains of what is essentially their proto-being grandfather, Ymir. Certainly on some aspects, if you think that Besla didn't come from Bor, their father, so she's likely to be of Jotun descent. What we have is a tale of destruction of an ancestor in order to create a structured and ordered manifestation. It's the brothers that also give life and breath to man, but it is interestingly only implicit that the giver of breath to man is Odin. It's also implied that the second brother gives consciousness and the third gives movement and physicality to man. The sources from Sturluson are not explicit in the identification of which deity gives which gift to man. As I said though, with the root of Wirthanas as Wode, then it is highly likely that consciousness is a gift of Odin and not any of the other hypostasis forms. What we also have is the mythology that the brotherhood evolves elsewhere, and we later find a notion that in the absence of Odin, Vili and Ve share his possessions, including his wife Frigg, and they assume rulership of Asgard when Odin is presumed missing and dead on one of his many journeys. So, as I said, one of the more interesting aspects is the formation of the manifest cosmological alignment of Yggdrasil, and this is in the slaying of their ancestor Ymir. And this is interesting on many aspects. It explains the manifestation on a causal plane, the primal matter of Niflheim coming into contact with the raw energy of Muspelheim, which brings forth Ymir and the cow Dumla. The second being Buri, father of Odin Vili, has ultimately a son Bor, and this is perhaps where we find it some association with the Hindu mythology. Buri bearing similarities with Vishnu, who emerges into the void, where once there was only Brahma. And we also see similar within Egyptian mythology, where we have the emergence of Nun and the cosmic cow Mehedwet, who brings forth Atum-Ra. Atum-Ra has very similar associations and aspects to Buri, but also perhaps to Odin and Shiva in terms of creation and destruction. So the associations, as I say, they imply that Odin is likely of mixed descent, having both Jotun as chaotic manifestation, and if we view Bor as beings descended, polarization aspect of that, then they represent consciousness as opposed to chaos. Odin combines both of them, and it's that combination that sets Odin apart from the other deities within the Norse mythology. So as I say, order out of chaos is an interesting concept that ultimately is found within Norse mythology, as the earth is made of the flesh and the rocks of the bones, etc., as it says there. What is described there is the conscious act that renders order upon the manifest chaos of Ymir. And the parts of Ymir are ordered in accordance with their natures. and the process describes the destruction of the non-ordered manifestation and the subsequent reordering, a bit of alchemy applied within a cosmological context. Interestingly, one of the fields of study I've taken upon myself is to look into the application of quantum mechanics in terms of the foundation of mythology. And what we find here is the requirement of a consciousness to bring into being quantum potentiality. And this is what's certainly applied by the deities of Odin, Vili and Ve. No discussion of Odin is exempt or complete from inclusion of the animal aspects. And the animals are certainly important to Odin and also within the left-hand path. The animals associated are significant. Foremost, we have the raven and the wolf. And the two ravens are perhaps most famous, depicted there upon the shoulders of Odin. They're Hugin and Munin, which translated means thoughtful and mindful, more commonly thought of as thought and memory, two aspects of the conscious mind. Odin refers to them directly, and he does at one point express more concern for the loss of memory than he does thought. Obviously, without memory, we lose all knowledge. It's hard to be wise if you don't know the experiences or what you've learnt before. So he values memory above thought, perhaps. The presence of ravens, obviously, as a carrion bird, has associations with the crow. Such we find ravens and crows around the battlefields, feeding upon the dead, certainly within the Middle Ages of Europe. And this is perhaps appropriate for Odin and his epithet as chooser of the slain. Also, we find Odin referred to as the hanging god. And again, there's the common depiction of ravens and crows plucking the eyes from hanging criminals throughout the ages. Also with Odin, no depiction's complete without the hungry wolves of Geri and Freki, both meaning the same thing, which is greedy. Interestingly, Odin doesn't eat food within the mythology. He only consumes wine or mead. He gives all of the food that's given to him to the wolves. Most interestingly is within Icelandic poetry especially, feeding the wolves is a kenning for offering the dead in battle. And one would offer the dead of the enemy to feed the wolves of Odin. And it would be a way of offering them as a sacrifice to Odin in order for favour within the battle. Again, given Odin's role as a psychopomp and chooser of the slain, then the associations with the falling in battle are clear as to why that was worked as a kenning. Regardless of some of the more controversial things that Ragnar Redbeard may have written, he perhaps got this absolutely accurate when he said that national crests are selected not as a rule from doves, lambs, goats, magpies and hares, but from lions, tigers, wolves, serpents, dragons, bears, eagles, and the fighting man. The clear denotion of the power of the animals associated with Odin in this perhaps more famous depiction of him, and this image here denotes exactly that. It's the aristocracy, its power in battle, and its consciousness. The animalistic instincts of the wolf representing the power and cunning, lustful nature of the wild, but also of Odin, as we see later in the mythology, but also the ravens perhaps denoting a slight bipolar aspect to the consciousness of Odin. As mentioned before, Odin is almost incomplete as a character, as an image without the grey horse, the eight-legged horse of Sleipnir, which is interestingly a child of Loki, in an amusing tale where Loki turns into a horse and fathers a child. Sleipnir is the fastest horse in all the 9 worlds of Yggdrasil, and as I said, he's grey. Sleipnir is a grey horse, has many connotations, and certainly within Norse mythology, the appearance of a rider on a grey horse is a portent of evil. Even within Sami mythology, where they have a god of death, Rutu, who rides a grey horse. More interestingly, as the Sami as a tribe have no horses in Lapland. And again, even within a later Abrahamic context, you find the four horsemen of the apocalypse and the rider on the grey horse, death, again drawing associations to perhaps the same archetype. Sleipnir may also represent a shamanic spirit animal, as it's used by Odin to traverse the 9 worlds of Yggdrasil in a way that none of the other gods are able to do so. Also of interest is that Yggdrasil itself, it means Yg's steed, and Ygg is a known name of Odin himself. So it may be that Yggdrasil is a macrocosmic astral journey, whereas Sleipnir is the microcosmic. The implication of that may be that Odin is a micro-archetype of a much larger macro-archetype, again drawing lines of parallel with Shiva within the larger Brahmic context. As I mentioned before, Odin has the ability to shift form. 2 of the animals that he does shift into are a serpent and an eagle. The myth of Odin's theft of the mead of inspiration from the giant Suttung depicts the transformation of Odin into these animals. The serpent obviously has direct symbolic representation within a left-hand path context and within other world mythologies, and is typically associated with antinomian beings and a reference points for philosophies of many approaches to the left-hand path. In Greek mythology we have Ledon and Othion, Ledon being the serpent that lays around the tree that bears the golden apples, which may have some association with the Norse Jormungand, and is ultimately overcome by Heracles, which is essentially a Greek version of Thor. We have Othion, which incubates the world egg, and at the bottom of the world tree, if we assume that at some point that may have grown out of a seed or an egg, we find the Norse serpent or worm Nithog. Again, so drawing parallels there between the Greek and the Norse. The most commonly known myth of the serpent, of course, is the Garden of Eden, where we see the serpent as the great tempter. And within Egyptian mythology, we also can draw parallels to the rebellious god Set. While Set does not have a serpent form, he is later associated with the great serpent Apep. Further suggestive of Odin and links to the serpent is 2 of the names that he is known by are Svafnir and Ofnir. These are also 2 of the serpents that are found at the roots of Yggdrasil itself, alongside Nithog. The snake also obviously represents the process of remanifestation as it sheds its skin and is essentially reborn from itself. It has links to Kundalini symbolism as well, and the ascension of the feminine energy to the union with the consciousness. And this is of definite interest in an assessment of Odin, who combines feminine magics, much to the amusement of gods such as Loki, and perhaps representing the embrace of the feminine in union with the masculine consciousness. This is what sets Odin apart from the other deities. We also find associations of and accusations of bisexual nature hurled at each other by Odin and Loki within the mythology. Again, perhaps referencing the embrace of the internal feminine energies, perhaps a yogic aspect to Odin, and perhaps the eagle and the snake in union. Also, we find within Nietzsche's The Spug Zarathustra, where the sage Zarathustra is accompanied by both animals. Jung analysed Nietzsche's Zarathustra at one point and identified the animals as symbolic of the natures of man, interpreting the serpent as representing the physical and the eagle as representing the consciousness. And this is perhaps symbolic as well. The eagle sits on top of the world tree Yggdrasil, with the hawk sat in between its eyes, almost as if the eagle needed a third eye. Many, obviously, occult and mystical associations with those notions can be drawn. So within Norse mythology, there are also a couple of other vital deities to discuss in terms of the association for themselves and Odin on a larger context to the left-hand path. In the Voluspa, we hear of the treatment of the witch, the proto-witch, Gullveig, who after a third rebirth of being murdered and reborn and remanifested and coming back for more, perhaps Odin ceases to attempt to kill that what he can't kill, and embraces the feminine energies and asks after the mysteries that allow her to be beyond his control and his power. Verse 22 claims that Gullveig is now known as Heitha, which means bright one, and denotes her as a favourite of the wicked women, perhaps suggesting a further matronage to witches as a proto-witch. The name of the bright one is interesting, especially as Gullveig means lust for gold. And later on we'll have a look at some of the further extrapolations that we can make from that name of the bright one. So Gullveig-Freyja-Frigg then is a controversial theory that I'm putting forward, is that they are hypostasis of the feminine within Norse mythology, much as we find Parvati, Durga and Kali within Hindu mythology. And what we find here is that Gullveig obviously arrives as the proto-witch and is beyond the control of Odin. He can't kill her, he can't get rid of her, so he has to invite her in. And this is the ultimate conversion tactic, perhaps, and explains the unknown origins of Freyja. It's never explained with any of the existing mythologies that we still have, how Freyja comes to be in Asgard. Her brother certainly transfers as part of the hostage exchange that ends the war between the Aesir and the Vanir gods. Freyja is just there. So it's not just an assumption that Freyja is this mysterious Gullveig. There is an etymological basis for this. So as we find Freyja referenced as the sister of Yngve-Freyja and daughter of North, she's one of the Vanir within that context. And again, within Freyja, we find reference to her powers of witchcraft and powers that Odin lusts after and seeks to know, the feminine magics of Seath, divination. She is classed as a sexual deity of feminine energy that all men lust over. She has an affinity with cats and is associated with battle and death. Again, the links between Freyja and Odin couldn't be more clear in some of those. What likely happens is that Freyja becomes Frigg through marriage to Odin and motherhood. And what we see is a process from the lustful, powerful witch of Gullveig coming in and being a tutor, taking her share of the battle, fallen dead alongside Odin, and eventually becoming a queen, almost like a patronage and a matronage. You find a feminine aspect of Odin arising. We find some evidence of this in the myth of Freyja's husband, Uther, who goes missing and is presumed lost and dead, much as Odin is at one point. More interesting for the fact that Odin is derived from the noun Other, which again means inspiration, again linking back to Woad, as we said earlier. Again, you can draw the links. Parvati in Hindu mythology is the wife and mother, as Frigg. In her hideous and aggressive form, we may find Kali, which has some aspects, perhaps drawing lines with Gullveig. And Freyja, we find manifesting possibly within Hindu mythology as Durga. Like Freyja, Durga also rides into battle as a warrior and has an affinity with cats. This is where comparative mythology comes in quite handy when you're trying to fill in the gaps where all lore has perhaps been lost and we weren't lucky enough to have such recorded. I said I would expand upon the associations of Gullveig and greed for gold and her later epithet of the Shining One. Interestingly, the tears of Freyja are golden, and she is also referred to as the Shining One at one point. We also find the myth of the pursuit of the Brisingamen necklace by Freyja, in which she's willing to exchange sexual favours in order to obtain the thing she lusts after most. Again, gold lust. What we find is that not only is Gullveig an excellent counterpart with a titular form of Freyja or Frigg, we also find that there is an etymological link, as I mentioned, that supports a relevance to the left-hand path. As lust for gold, Gullveig later becomes Heath, the Shining One. Obviously, the common epithet of the planet Venus is the morning star, or the bringer of light, which we find within the Bible, in reference to both Jesus and Lucifer. The Greek name for Lucifer is Eosphorus or Phosphorus, which gives us Eos. From Eos, we can link this etymologically to the localized Germanic deity of Ostara, from where we draw Easter, obviously denoting the return of spring and the coming of light. Ostara links us to Ishtar and Astarte and Isis. Isis, interestingly, with the golden wings, links to Freyja, again, with the golden falcon cloak that she lends to Loki at one point. So the common traits in all forms of the archetype are lust, fertility, magic, feminine aspects, and the maternal instinct. And we find such within the names as well. Loki is perhaps everybody's favourite Marvel character, but he's also quite enjoyable within Norse mythology as well. And certainly in a left-hand path context, there is no other deity that is as antinomian as Loki. Certain heathen groups will even forbid the mention of the name Loki within their discussions. Perhaps drawing too much of a Christian context upon Loki. He's far from being a heathen Lucifer. He is a blood brother to Odin and is accepted as one of the Aesir gods, despite having Jotun descent. Interestingly, perhaps, although there is no real evidence as to what derives such, he is referred to as Lofi's son, rather than by his father's name, which is the common Scandinavian trait. The inferred slight there is that he is perhaps a bastard-off child, or that there is some issue around his birth that is disrespectful to refer to his father Faboti. It may even be that Loki may be the brother of Odin, Lothar, which we find also referred to as Vili within Gylfagganing. And Sturluson lists the triad of Odin, Loki and Hona as travel companions. He also refers to Loki as the trier of Hona's mind, which he also describes Loki's relationship with Thor very well, and perhaps gives some intuition that we may be talking Odin, Loki and Thor when we're talking Odin, Vili and Ve. Certainly in a Jungian context, what we find then is archetypes of the wise old man, the warrior and the shadow. What certainly becomes inherent and apparent to one when you're reading through the body of Norse mythology is that Loki has a very valuable function for Odin. Perhaps the best way to explain this is to think of Loki as a spy. He is the spy that's sent on the missions that Odin, as the sacral king, is unable to be seen to be associated with. The dirty tricks, the dirty black op missions. And Loki almost goes in behind enemy lines to do that which will be denied. Odin would claim no responsibility and no knowledge of what Loki has been up to. Yes, this is an aspect of Loki, a shadow aspect of Odin, but it also serves a very important role in doing the things that Odin deems essential, but far beyond the realms of debating them with the other gods. He has another means to do it on a covert basis through the actions of Loki. So what I have mentioned several times then is the reference of the deities to the left-hand path. So the fundamental question for those who may be unaware then is, what is the left-hand path? The common usage of terms like, are you in the right? Oh, that's the right thing to do, denotes that the right is good, it's correct. It also has associations with the masculine and what is deemed ethical. The left is taken as a term from the Latin word for sinister. It is left. And there is an age-old suspicion of people with left-handedness that they may be the devil's workmen, or they are of a devious nature. It is used to denote the other, the bad, the weak, the evil, the immoral. None of which are strictly true and perhaps portray a linguistic bias through Latin. The left-hand path truly is an alternative philosophy. It's an approach to life, religion, and magic. The common approach to religion is some variant of the right-hand path. It's comfort in numbers, and with that comfort in numbers, it's the absence of responsibility for your own actions. It typically implies subservience to a society, a god, and a desire within a theistic context to become one with that deity, to ascend and form a yogic union almost, which obviously leads to the repression of the consciousness and the individual self. The left-hand path then is totally contrary to this. It's about taking responsibility for yourself, not asking others for assistance where you could do things for yourself. It's about pushing your own limits. The dualistic nature is intrinsic within human society, that we have these two approaches. The tendency of human mind is always to interpret all data in a relative nature and polarize them as such. So we typically get what is cold is the absence of heat, what is dark is the absence of light. This is where, if the common prevailing view is that the majority are right, then to be anything but with the majority in thought and approach is to be wrong and to be evil, to be sinister. Certainly anybody's presence in a meeting such as this and coming to a place such as New Horizons, that's certainly denoting that you're starting to think, at least in some aspects, beyond the confines of what is commonly accepted and perpetuated within the media. The left-hand path ultimately forces the individual to control the objective universe and harmonize it with their will. In contrast, the right-hand path, the subjective universe of the self, is ultimately suppressed and harmonized within the objective, annihilating the individual, as I said. The Jungian process of individuation embodies some aspects of this approach, as does the work of Gurdjieff and the awakening of the self to an awakened consciousness rather than a sleep state, and being aware of what you do, why you do it, why you think like you do. Is it your thought or somebody else's? These are aspects certainly applicable to the left-hand path. Jung employed the term the self to describe the totality of the I in combination with the collective unconsciousness. And we need to be mindful of any confusion that may arise. The self is this totality, but fundamentally it's the preservation of the ego self that is intrinsic to the left-hand path. In terms of magical application, there is the associations of white magic and black magic. In order to provide a clearer conceptualization of the morality of the left-hand path, you may think in terms of the common portrayals of left and black magic, and this is something I'll go into shortly. Morality, again, is within a social context and is more correctly termed ethics, and is subjective and driven by popular opinion. Some of the common associations then, perhaps interestingly, as I said earlier about Odin combining both aspects of himself, is the common functions of the two hemispheres of the brain, the left brain and the right brain. They cross over somewhat confusingly. The left side of the brain is typically associated with the right hand and is responsible for analytical thought, logic, language, reasoning. calculating all of the methodical and the objective data sets, and is typically deemed of a male association, whereas the left-hand side of the brain is, the right-hand side of the brain is control of the left-hand side of the body, and is generally thought of as being more artistic, creative and imaginative, also being the centres of emotional control and response. If anybody's trying to develop themselves, one of the easiest tasks you can do is to choose your dominant hand and put it down, and pick up a pen with the other hand and try to write or draw with the other hand that you use less. And this forces the brain to start using those circuits more and can develop a cross-brain network, much as we see within the mythology of Odin. Given the psychological traits on the screen there, the historic association of mediumship and magic, such as Norse thief, as being feminine magics and passive in origin, would put them within the aspects of the right hemisphere of the brain, subsequently the left hand. This is perhaps where Odin becomes interested in crossing over to the left hemisphere, in his embrace of the feminine arts alongside the more linguistic-based approach of his own use of the runes, certainly. It's the combination of both hemispheres, the union of the masculine and the feminine, that we see embraced ultimately within yoga and the ascension of the Kundalini energies, and we find again within Hindu society and the Hindu left-hand path practice of Vamamaga and the Vamcharyans there, who are essentially the magicians, and they employ tantric yoga practices much to a similar extent as what Odin may be seen to do so, antinomian actions and also emphasis on the feminine. So when society would deem something that is other than what is common and mainstream to be good or evil, then what we have there is an application of an entirely subjective and relative term. What is deemed good by society is driven by that popular opinion. Certainly given the climate in the world at the moment, there seems to be a bit of a line in the sand as to where popular opinion stands. In respect to the social and ethical good, it's perhaps noticeable that society once deemed slavery to be ethical and good, and any thoughts to the other to be evil and incorrect. Abrahamic approach would hold that which is good to be in accordance with the decree of God, specifically Jehovah. What we may also find as a definition of good is that which is beneficial to the self. Socrates equated it such when he deemed it what was pleasurable or what was desirable, denoted what was ultimately good. That is perhaps the yardstick of measure for morality in the left-hand path, and defining what is good in your own opinion and your own subjective views rather than what is imposed upon you by society, is what is good for you. There is no point certainly in doing something that is harmful to yourself. If we deem what is harmful to the self to be evil, then that is perhaps the more accurate portrayal than that is which is commonly used of something which is other to what is accepted. To gain becomes good, and to lose becomes evil, perhaps making Gordon Gekko correct in the statement of greed is good. It is important to note, however, what is good for the individual may indeed be that which is in the interests of society on the whole. We may also find conflict between them, where the bank robber may steal from the bank and fiscally benefit for himself, deeming the bank robbery to be good, but ultimately society deems it to be bad, and then the ultimate end of that would be that the bank robber may lose their freedom. So what he thought was good may turn out to be inherently bad for him. Such is also an application of three main levels of morality. You also, beyond the personal subjective morality, you get a social approved morality, which is essential. If you want to operate within society, you have to at least know and tolerate their morals and ethics to a certain extent, or to be able to work within them, even if you don't agree with them.
There is a maxim in the Norse mythology which states that no man enters the hall of valor who cannot get past the wolves. You just told us what the names mean, therefore it's not telling you that greed is good.
But that is certainly one aspect of it. But if you think that greed is actually good, if it benefits the self, that would be deemed what you eat is good. Because you want it in order for your own benefit and your health.
It's not greed, is it?
No, but if you greed to a certain extent to want for yourself is perhaps good. Of course, there is a line where greed becomes detrimental to the self, and then it would no longer be good.
Odin also said that we must look at the consequences of our actions.
Yes, he did. He did. As Odin does so, which is why Odin is so fundamentally important in the left-hand path context, for his ability to defy the social ethics that are upheld by the other deities and go beyond them. As I said, with the actions of Loki, sometimes we may find that Odin is beyond such and is using them where he cannot take on those notions upon himself, or to be seen to do so, lest he jeopardize his rulership. And this is the final aspect of morality, where you get political morality. So this is where Odin cannot be seen to be doing these actions, but he wishes to do so. And that's the fundamental responsibility. One of the views I have is the slaying of Balder, ultimately by Hod, which is constructed by Loki. If you're talking in terms of Ragnarok, the ultimate way for Odin to ensure that Balder survives is to send Balder to the place where Ragnarok will not harm him, to hell, to put him in the care of hell. To do so is a perfect way to use Loki to construe that event so that he will be resurrected back.
Surely that's just another story of the cycle of the sun.
Indeed. If you look at Balder's aspect as a solar deity, then absolutely. It's the descent into the underworld, again, that we find in Egyptian mythology, and the consequence of the resurrection of that later on in bringing back society. And this is where you can draw the associations between Norse mythology and Egyptian mythology. One is typically viewed is that white magic will be deemed to be good, black magic is held to be evil, which is a rather simplistic interpretation. Tends to draw lines of white magic being good and associated with the right-hand path, and left-hand path magicians tend to be of the black magic variety. It's a simplistic bias. And we find such also within chivalric tales of knights entering into battle. The white knight and the black knight, every child knows who to support. It's perhaps a bit of a misconstrued idea. The key variance ultimately between white magic and black magic is the presence or the absence of what constitutes prayer. Regardless of form, prayer is little more than a prostate plea of subjugation to an energy outside of the self. To kneel before a mighty being, pleading for assistance and forgiveness, or denying one's own responsibility and power to act within a situation. In the act of prayer, one remains in a state similar to a puppy. Only through self-reliance is the puppy able to become the wolf. On the left-hand path, the adherents will worship no deity. Worship is the one line that you will do well to find anybody on the left-hand path that is engaged in any form of worship. The individual acknowledges the potential that is inherent within the self, perhaps the inner god force, the black flame even, or even woad. And they deem that they are able to manifest reality in accordance with quantum psychology as posited by Robert Anton Wilson. The individual ultimately must seize responsibility for their actions, never begging forgiveness. It's the notion of Nietzsche's eternal recurrence. Live today so that you're happy to repeat that action exactly over and over and over again. Then you have no need for forgiveness, and it's a very good moral compass. Perhaps one of the biggest depictions of black magic is the summoning of a demon within a triangle of constraint. And typically any of these Gothic rituals are applied by a Solomonic magician who will threaten the demonic entity with a blasting rod of Jehovah. Any business deal that involves such a threat is likely to turn sour. So it's no wonder that the right-hand path magicians who engage in an evocation of a demonic energy find themselves on the wrong end of that entity at a later date. Certainly within left-hand path, anybody who does work with the evocation of a demonic entity has no need to threaten or restrain or constrain that energy. It's a working relationship rather than a blackmail operation. One of the common terms taken from Nietzsche is that of the herd, and it's absolutely prevalent within all left-hand path mythologies and philosophies within the Western Hemisphere. As I said, what we find is a use of essentially of what Aquino termed black magic within Temple of Set context. It's akin to a theurgy of the self-alchemy, essentially. It's ascension of consciousness. What we find is it's possible to deem Vanic magics of the feminine, of Seath and herbs and crystals as being right-hand path. And these are what interest Odin, especially the Seath and the shamanic journeying, the Dionysic embrace, the ecstatic trance, the surrender of consciousness. And this is what interests Odin from Gullveig-Freyja. And this is that embrace of the feminine that no other deity is willing to embrace and they see as being unnatural. When Nietzsche refers to the herd mentality, it's copied and extrapolated many times by the likes of Anton LaVey. What he's talking about is the sheep mentality. Everybody's doing it, so I will do it. It's the notion of a snowflake feeling no responsibility because they're in greater numbers and they went with the popular vote. For those who feel weak, perhaps, they will feel that they are empowered within a larger context, and their failures can be hidden within the masses. Certainly, algae are formidable as a mass, but an individual algae in a petri dish is nothing. It's this mentality that we find within the use of most popular lists and top 10 music, top 10 films. And denoting what you should watch, what you should listen to, what you should read. It's the ability to step beyond that and seek for yourself that is so inherent to the left-hand path. A school child certainly knows the pressure to wear the latest cool trainers. What typically occurs is if you've not got the latest trainers that everybody else is wearing, you will be deemed uncool and subject to victimization. Conformity with the herd offers protection. Schools in England especially reduce this element of social behaviour to the enforcement of a uniform. It eliminates the individual within the school context, and certainly there are many teachers out there who see no benefit to the uniform other than it forcing parents to buy additional clothing, and certainly it does very little to suppress bullying behaviour or victimisation. The suppression of the individuality in this approach is a very basic conditioning state of the herd mentality, to fit in, to comply. And it's followed on with the indoctrination of the educational system, where they tell you what answers to think, rather than how to think and find the answers for yourself. And this is something that's been going on for many years, and certainly it's not unique to this century or even this country. I find this around the world. Some 120 years ago, Nietzsche wrote about his disdain for the education system in Germany that was just producing autonomons that did as they were told to do for a production line of commerce. And this is ultimately what steered the education towards physics or sciences or towards maths and away from any liberal arts that encourages free thinking. Certainly of interest perhaps to those of you that attend here regularly is the notion of acceptance of anything that comes out of the words of NASA. NASA essentially a new church, a new religion. You put somebody in a lab coat, have them give a press conference, 90% of the world population accept what they say and never question it. This is a prime example of the herd mentality of the right-hand path. Again, stepping beyond that and questioning what they're saying, why they're saying it, that's the first steps towards the left-hand path and separating myself. I'm about at where I thought we would be for a break. I think that aligns. Okay. Thank you. I just want to say thank you to the two lovely ladies that I was speaking to during the intermission there. Some fantastic conversation and some really interesting information, things I will look at in my comparative mythology. So back into the topics of Odin in terms of framing Odin as a deity within the left-hand path approach, philosophy, religion and magic. And to do this, we need to necessarily then look at Norse mythology. And what I'll now do is take some extracts and pull through the associations there that lead to support the theory of Odin as being the archetypal deity, the left-hand path. One of the absolute core texts within Norse mythology is that of the Havamal. And here we find the wisdom of Odin, the High One, and guidance. And what we find here is the notion of not boasting about your intelligence and keeping some of your cards up your sleeves, essentially. What this is the benefit of deceit, and not telling everything you know, not showing all of your abilities, keeping something hidden so that people underestimate you. This is where Odin especially is skillful in acts of subterfuge and concealing his identity. Nobody expects it to be Odin, and then they are often misled or find themselves failing miserably when they find that they've insulted him or underestimated him or assumed he was some poor peasant. What we find if we apply this strategy to war and poker is that the wise man will weaken his position through revealing his mental abilities. What Odin's counsel here is essentially his restraint in order to find that those in your company are unaware of the potential for the individual to manipulate the situation, to steer the conversation where they want it to go. And this is also circumvent to aspects of Thor that we see later in Harbard's song, and where boasting of one's prowess ultimately invites challenge. Challenges to one's ability may lead to the diminishing reputation if you find that you are defeated. What we also find is further notions from Odin on deceit. And what we have here is the counsel to observe and orient oneself to the environment. That's both socially and physically. Observation, of course, allows the collection of data, and that allows you to assess physical threats, proximity to escape routes, weapons, psychological roles, social hierarchies. It knows who is the threat, who's the danger, who's the pressure point, who you can manipulate in any situation. Where we find this applied in a modern context is by US Air Force Colonel John Boyd and the notion of OODA that changed dogfighting during the course of the Vietnam War. And OODA stands for Observe, Orient, Decide and Act. There is no time for second guessing. You judge, you decide what is likely to happen, where the threats are, you make a decision and you implement it. Second guessing will lead to your defeat. This is the basis of all good initial military tactics and immediate strategy. Doesn't necessarily apply in terms of Napoleonic grand strategy. Further from the Havamal, we find notions of control. What we find here is the statement of the importance of retention of cognitive ability, rational thought. Within a left-hand path context, no adept should ever require intoxication to the point where they're impaired physically or mentally, and control is of paramount importance. Without control, you may find yourself subject to the will of others. And obviously you descend to herd instinct, unable to react to the situation unfolding around you. Although you find the work of psychologists such as Timothy Leary and the works of Aldous Huxley using psychotropic drugs to achieve heightened states of consciousness, there does remain a risk that as you do descend into Dionysian ecstasy, the notions of Seath and Freyja's magic there of the feminine, you abandon the Apollonian control. It's the retention of an aspect of control where Odin is empowered, and the union of the male consciousness allowing under a controlled situation to embrace that aspect of Seath and that ecstatic trance and inspiration. Verse 36 of the Havamal here is concerned with the issue of independence. What we find once more is the expression of one's independence from society and self-sufficiency, fundamental concepts of the left-hand path approach. An individual is then free to pursue their own spiritual independence. It's the Jungian individuation process. Setting boundaries against society and surviving without recourse to sustenance obtained by charity of others is to become free from the protection of the herd. When you are self-sufficient, interestingly, as I was talking about earlier with somebody during the break, this sets you apart. You're not dependent on the government or the ruling class to allow you to do something in order to survive, because you are self-sufficient. This is perhaps taken to the extreme with off-grid living approaches, which ultimately fit within the left-hand path context. And certainly there are left-hand path groups that have taken off-grid living to be a challenge of pushing one's own physical and mental limits to the edge to find out how far you can go. In the Satanic Bible, Anton LaVey suggests that the adept of the left-hand path should not turn the other cheek if somebody was to strike you upon one cheek. Instead, self-preservation is the highest law, and you should smash them on their other cheek. What we find here in the Havamal is similar guidance from Odin. One of the acceptance of enemies and their role. There is no room here for notions of loving one another. What we counsel here from Odin is the friendship of friends and the enmity of enemies, rightly so. In order to ensure survival of the self, one must be prepared to acknowledge the enemies as such and prepare for an encounter accordingly. To do so otherwise is to delude yourself. Notions of equality of intellect, consciousness perhaps more appropriately here within the Havamal, where we hear from Odin that there is no equality of consciousness of intelligence within men, that some are wise and some are nowhere near wise, but ultimately the benefit lies in being half-wise. The notion perhaps that the wisest men ultimately realize the fallacy of the world that we live in and may descend into a hermetic state and living in a cave in isolation, removed from society as a whole, as they realize the sheer futility of the situation. What we find here is an allusion perhaps to the notions of Socrates, that he wasn't really wise, he wasn't truly wise about all things because he didn't know what lays beyond death. And this is perhaps the point of Odin, that we can be half wise or clueless. Again, on wisdom, Odin counsels ascension of man to awakened states, although once more warning against the pursuit of wisdom beyond what is needed for happiness. Nietzsche also warned pursuit of the overman was fraught with risks and to fear staring into the abyss. Perhaps the majority should aspire to awaken from the herd and become higher men in Nietzschean terms, rather than to pursue the overman of Nietzsche. This is where the knowledge of absolute disillusionment, the fallacy of the world, kicks in. Work ethic is something that is at the core of Norse society at the time, but he is counselled from Odin in reference to the level of dedication, and it's exemplary of the work ethic that is required upon the left-hand path. The choice is difficult to segregate yourself from society and to seek assistance of others or a god or any other social group is an easy path. To work for oneself is ultimately a very difficult task, and it can lead to alienation and also all the risks, but equally the rewards are one's own. Counsel of Odin specifically is that the lazy reap no reward. Those who work hard and push further reap the results in the end. The guidance is perfectly matched to the left-hand path. This is quite an interesting verse from the Havamal, and it's ultimately against prejudice against those of restricted physicality. It's anti-discriminatory, and it supports the ability of all, regardless of whether or not one is blind or deaf. It outlines that there is still something you can do, that all things are better states than being dead. And this is the ascension of consciousness on the left-hand path, especially. That there is no requirements for physical supremacy. Physical might may work on a right-hand path aspect. Certainly within the left-hand path, it has certain applications, but it's about the willpower and the ascension of consciousness. Honor. Honor is absolute paramount within some groups of the left-hand path and also within Norse society at this time. Here we find Odin glorifying those who live their lives with honour. It is the thing that will not die. Although the verses clearly state that the self must also die, this is the Norse soul law. This is the Leich, not the consciousness. It's not the conscious soul that we commonly think of in a Western aspect. This is one of several parts of the soul within Norse law, much akin to Egyptian soul law. Odin here is then referencing the demise of the physical form rather than the consciousness. This is not about suppression of the ego in ultimate union and assimilation with a greater deity on a metaphysical form. This is just about the death of one's physical form, allowing one to ascend and carry on a conscious level. Obviously, for those fallen in battle and deemed to be heroic, they will find themselves dining in Valhalla, and others may find themselves living in relative ease in hell, under the care there, along with those who died of old age or disease. Within Norse mythology, the notions of self-sacrifice are absolutely central. Odin is a god who sacrifices himself to himself, and this is also referenced within Norse, within the left-hand path context. It is the ability to deconstruct oneself, realize what's strong, what is strength, what is a weakness, and to re-assimilate on an alchemical basis, and to become something more, something other. The adept must question all of their acts and define their own morality to do this. This means segregation from the herd and their wider social structure. They must understand the social ethics and laws in order to utilize them to their advantage and to work within the constraints of them in order to not be isolated and victimized. To reach beyond the unknown, as Odin does here, is to find the mysteries beyond your own localized existence. The word rune etymologically is derived from runa and means mystery. As Odin gains knowledge of the mysteries, what he gains is actual true knowledge in a Platonic sense. The sip of mead taken by Odin and poured forth in verse 140 is from Uthreira. The container holds the mead of wisdom and poetry. It's the cup of inspiration. The next verse outlines the acceleration in wisdom and the acclamation of prosperity that follows. This is not necessarily fiscal prosperity. It can be a value of knowledge or other things that the individual places value upon. In verse 142 of the Havamal, we find Odin essentially calling for the individual to seek out the mysteries, to pursue them. It's within the mysteries that we find true knowledge. Odin here refers to a letter of immense power. This letter is perhaps in itself a rune or a mystery. It may have the form of a rune stave, and it may ultimately represent the key to all other mysteries. It's just as likely, though, given the subjective nature of the runes, that this will differ from one person to another, and what manifests massive change in the life of one will have no effect upon the other. So I'm not here able to tell you what the runic key for yourself is. That is something that only you could determine. I have found a runic key for myself. It's changed my life immensely over the years, and but that will not work for you. It's personal and subjective. Within the runic key, when you unlock this for yourself, what you may find, it's the key to identification of one's own entelekia, your teleological purpose, unlocking the DNA potential for your own future manifestations. In a direct reference that fits to the left-hand path approach, here we find Odin giving some guidance against prayer and supplication. Prayer is ultimately a sacrifice or a gift. It is part of an exchange, and Odin views here prayer as a gift for which something must be returned to the one that offers the prayer. And thus he counsels that man avoids prayer. Odin would be obliged to return a gift in exchange for that prayer. And it's what we end up here with is prayer being a form of blackmail, forcing Odin to give you something in exchange for your prayer. If you think at the time that the Havamal was written down, never mind the time the oral law was passed around, the population of the world was about 300 million people, according to statistics. That's a lot of letters, prayers. If you think in terms of a Santa letter, 300 million letters requiring something back in exchange would be enough to break anyone, never mind somebody receiving 8 billion requests in the form of prayer today. If you think rather than Santa that could be every day, every minute, no wonder that you have a deity here asking people not to pray. Perhaps also in the left-hand path context, one of the implications of this is the notion that it is time for mankind as a species to grow up and stop asking for assistance. Yes, there are things that perhaps are beyond our control, and you may ultimately feel the need to cry for assistance for and beseech another energy to assist and help. And there are those situations, certainly. But if you were to talk to people about some of the things that they pray for, then it's equivalent of asking mum and dad to cook your tea on Saturday, even though you're 43 years old and have moved to another country. It's the need to grow up now. Stop asking. Harbard's song is one of the more amusing tales within Norse mythology. And in it we find Harbard, the ferryman, is essentially Odin in disguise, refusing to ferry Thor across the fjord. and given tales of Thor's strength when pitted against Jotun and the world serpent Jormungand, Thor hurls insults at the ferryman for being of lesser physicality. Certainly it would be normal for Thor to find himself physically superior, and here typifies an alpha male approach, and he tries to dominate what he sees to be the plebeian ferryman, and he holds no restraints as he insults him such. Unaware, of course, obviously, that the ferryman is his father, Odin. The retort from Harbard, Odin, in disguise, frames the superiority of intellect over Thor's physicality. He knows that Thor can't get to him, never mind beat him up or physically constrain him to get onto the ferry. Thor's stranded on the shore. Our Harbard there sets the measure of differential. Thor may be physically superior, but is intellectually inferior. Better recollection of this idea occurs in the identification of Thor as a god who receives servants deceased in battle, whilst Odin has the choice of the nobility. Again, the aristocracy, not of a common 21st century approach to aristocracy, perhaps more of the aristocracy of the soul or of the mind. Odin identifies Thor as a god of the lower class there. And certainly within notions of Thor in relation to farmers and working men, he serves as their protector, whereas Odin is the god of wisdom, poetry, death, war, hence lays claim to the nobles. It's not Odin's role to get involved in a battle, certainly much like the nobles that he would deem to be the god of. And indeed, many of the lineages of the royal families of Europe ultimately trace descent from Odin. Here we have perhaps an ambiguous reference to the feminine, and it may even be a homophobic slant, which is certainly common within Norse mythology. Notions such as ergi get bandied around quite commonly within the Icelandic sagas. So this is within the tale of Harbard and Thor on the ferry there. As the dialect of one-upmanship proceeds, Thor recalls victories over many Jotun, and Harbard recalls seduction of females through magic and charms, and briefly references war. What we have here is perhaps a curious reference. Whilst it's unclear as to what exactly is offered as a ring to Thor, it may be a poetic kenning for the anus. It is perhaps a homosexual slur against the epitome of herd masculinity. That is embodied, of course, within Thor. It's also important here to note Odin himself is subject to accusations within the lore, and because of the feminine aspects of his knowledge and his embrace of the feminine magics. As outlined previously in definitions of the left-hand path, it's the combination of the masculine and the feminine, and Odin embraces this, but perhaps realizes that Loki, Thor even, is unwilling to do so, hence the slur. Another one of the rich sources of Norse mythology is Lokasenna, where Loki tables various accusations against the other gods and goddesses. Here we find him bringing forth accusations of Seath and feminine witchcraft against Odin. As I say, the acceptance of Odin, of the feminine powers, is within a Norse context certainly unique, and perhaps even in modern day society, for someone to embrace the internal feminine may be frowned at within certain sectors. Gullveig, as mentioned earlier, may well represent the proto-witch, and we may find that the Gullveig-Freyja-Frigg trinity is cognate with the maiden mother crone divinity that is common within neo-pagan forms of Wicca. Skaldskaparmál is a interesting tale for a number of reasons. Here we find Odin assuming the name of Bolverk, which means evil worker, Again, given the common denotions of the left-hand path as being one of sinister nature or of evil, this is perhaps a fitting name for Odin here. Here we find Odin, as always, engineering situations, here to allow him access to the mead of poetry. It begins with a manipulation and a slaughtering of slaves, of Baugi, in order to find himself in a situation that he may engineer access to the mead he so desires. As he upholds his ultimate bargains here with Baugi, Suttung, who possesses the mead, refuses to allow access to Baugi and Bolverk, to the mead that he possesses. What occurs then is Bolverk, or Odin, persuading Baugi to bore a hole into the mountain. What Odin then does is take the form of a serpent. As we said earlier, obviously the serpent symbology within Odin, but also within the left-hand path context, quite paramount. The serpent, perhaps as the tempter that we find within the Garden of Eden, seduces Gunnloth, Suttung's daughter, who's protecting the mead within the mountain, and lays with her for 3 days. 3 and 9 numbers that are continually occurring within Norse mythology and full of much symbolism, but not for discussion necessarily here. Eventually, Gunnloth allows Odin, or Bolverk, to drink the mead. She allows him 3 mouthfuls of mead, in which he promptly drains the whole vessel, and ejects himself on the mountain and takes the form of an eagle. As he flies for an eagle, and he's consumed the mead of inspiration, the eagle perhaps representing here the ascension of Odin's consciousness from the consumption and the increased inspiration that he's undergone. What is held by poets to be their inspiration is deemed to be the droplets of the mead that fall from Odin's mouth as he flies back to Asgard. And it's these droplets of inspiration that inspire poets and artists. The Saga of the Volsungs is a personal favourite, and it depicts many instances of Odin's manipulation of human society and a family line in particular. And this is perhaps puppet master-esque, or something that we may find on popular TV series set in fictional worlds. And what we find is Odin manipulating events to create a lineage towards a final event that he knows needs to occur and must occur, and he's manufacturing the hero he needs. A pivotal moment early in the saga is perhaps readily familiar. At the feast of King Volsung, and a rival king, we hear of the arrival of a miserly old man, dressed in grey with a beard. Ultimately, it's Odin himself, unknown to the guests. What Odin does is he carries a sword into the king's hall and thrusts it into a tree at the centre of the hall, declaring that the one who is able to withdraw the sword will receive the gift. The references perhaps here to the Arthurian mythos are quite clear and explicit. And indeed there are many similarities with the tales as with Odin and Merlin. It's Sigmund, son of a King Volsung, who ultimately draws the sword and becomes Odin's chosen warrior at that point. What Odin's done, rather than confer a deific grace upon Sigmund, is to embolden his ego. He thinks that he's done this by himself. He believes in himself. More importantly, the belief of the other warriors in the hall in Sigmund as the chosen one is immediately created. This is perhaps Machiavellian political strategy on a deific scale. Also within the saga we find numerous manipulations. Odin appears unnamed as a psychopomp ferryman, carrying the dead king home, and where King Sigmund has turned against Odin. He declares that Odin does not wish me to wield the sword anymore, since it's now broken. I fought battles whilst it pleased him. The broken sword ultimately is stored and gathered and the recipient of the broken sword known as Garm is ultimately Sigurd. The pivotal section of the saga depicts the slaughter of the dragon or the worm, Fafnir, by Sigurd. What we find once more is the intervention of Odin with his compatriot Loki to construct a form of event to produce hatred between the brothers Regin and Fafnir over a gold hoard that is ultimately paid by Odin and Loki in recompense for the death of their brother. So Odin is creating a situation to enable Sigurd to be in the situation that will empower him to the point where Odin needs him to be. In order to aid Sigurd in the theft of the gold from Fafnir, Regin reforges the broken sword Garm. The sword consequently becomes so powerful that it will cut the anvil of the blacksmith in half. After much deliberation, rather than face the dragon Fafnir in a battle, what actually arises is the triumph of intellect and cunning over physical might. And Regin advises Sigurd to dig a ditch and slit the abdomen of his brother as he crawls over it. Sigurd is concerned by this and is worried about what may happen if the poisonous blood of Fafnir was to drip upon him in the ditch, but he proceeds to dig the ditch anyway. Whilst digging the ditch, Odin appears again as an old man, unnamed, with a beard, and advises Sigurd to dig several ditches in order to drain away the blood. He offers no caution, though, for Sigurd against contact with the blood, just advises that he should dig 7, not 1. After successfully slaying the dragon, Regin requests that Sigurd cooks the heart of his brother so that he may consume it. Again, here we get the notions of imbuing the power of the deceased that you've slain and taking on their essence by consuming the heart, something that's still done by some tribes around the world, where they will eat the heart of the freshly killed animal on a hunt. What we find happening next is very interesting, and as Sigurd is cooking the heart, he touches it to see if it's cooked, and he burns his finger. Instinctively placing his finger to his mouth, he inadvertently consumes the blood of Fafnir. Almost instantly, there is a change in consciousness in Sigurd as a result, and this is perhaps why Odin never gave any warning about contact with the blood. Sigurd immediately can understand the language of animals, and specifically the birds, perhaps representing a higher consciousness themselves. And the birds then warn Sigurd about Regin's intent to slaughter Sigurd. It's after Sigurd enacts his own self-defense in slaying Regin, he enters into the lair of the dragon, Fafnir. Fafnir as a dragon himself perhaps is represented within the runes that we'll look at later, within the Seeress rune, and the notion of the thorn guarding the treasure. The serpent or the dragon is always sat on the gold hoard, the treasure of power. Or even in terms of fairy tales, we find Sleeping Beauty behind the wall of thorns. Within the lair, Sigurd finds the Helm of Terror, the iconic Aegirshjelmr, that Fafnir in his dying breath describes as blowing poison in all directions, so that none ever dared come near him, and he feared no weapon. Perhaps interestingly, the Aegirshjelmr points in 8 directions, with the central point being that of Mythgarth, or man, for perhaps on a microcosmic scale. So this is the Aegirshjelmr. So not only does it alter the consciousness of Sigurd, but it also represents a protection element, which is what it was largely used as going forwards through history. But it also represents the ascended sapient mind of Sigurd within the tale. So what I present there are just some extracts of Norse mythology that frame Odin as the archetype of the left-hand path. Like the myths of Prometheus and Set, what we have is the rebellion of God of essential consciousness and the gift of that ability upon man in order to set themselves apart from the non-sapient animal world. The actions of Odin throughout the body of lore suggest that Odin is indeed a god of evolved consciousness. His function of giver of woad is essential to the presence of the Nietzschean will to power. The myths of Odin contain many references to shapeshifting, deceit, hundreds of names. Gylfagganing itself states that the Odin has many different names amongst all peoples of the world. The environmental influence upon our lives, the reality tunnels that shape our interpretation of the archetypes may be at play here. A person in sub-Saharan Africa certainly doesn't expect to see Odin in perhaps a form that resonates with Vikings or Northern Europeans. Certainly also if Odin was to appear in China or India, the transference or the transposition of the form would be required in order to fit the expectations of a conscious deity. In combination of the male and female energies and the blurring of the black and white moralities and also magics, Odin essentially becomes the grey god. And this is perhaps the root of his depictions as the grey old man dressed in dark grey. He utilises techniques that are generally thought of as being white or black magic, and his morality is only defined by himself, without concern ultimately for the judgment of the others, unless it impedes upon his ability to rule and deliver the course of events that he so desires. Odin crosses lines and practices arts that to the rest of society, especially within the Aesir gods, are forbidden. He will even raise the dead or break an oath, something that is a fundamental principle of Norse society, the giving of the oath. To be called an oath breaker is to be outcast from society. Odin will do this, and does. Odin plays the long game. He has the master plan that only he is ultimately privy to the details of. The game may manifest as a series of acts beyond judgment, as in the terms of Nietzsche, acts are done in love, are beyond good and evil. What we then find are the runic keys that are so essential to the Odin as chief god of the Aesir within the Norse mythology. And the runic keys have other applications rather than just divination or linguistic forms. For those not well versed with the runes, there are numerous forms of the runes that now exist, including the witch runes and many variants that bear very little symbolic similarity to the original runes. Historically, there are only 3 true sets of runes. The Elder Thuthark at the top left there, it's not really showing too well on the projector, I apologise. The Younger Thuthark and the Anglo-Frisian or Anglo-Saxon as it's sometimes called. There also exists the Armenian Thuthark, which is an esoteric set developed by Guido van List in the Neo-Germanic Romanticist era that predated the rise of the Socialist Party. What we find that, especially with List's Thuthark, is that although the development of such is unclear, it no manner detracts from the esoteric power and applicability of that system. The focus here, though, is upon the traditional runes of the Elder Thuthark, whereas the Younger Thuthark and the Anglo-Frisian or Anglo-Saxon were used largely for a linguistic base. The Elder Thuthark were always symbolic. They represent the mystery themselves, and that is how they were used as in a magical and mysterious context. A rune is not a symbol or a letter, representing a linguistic tool. Rune, as we say, represents a mystery. What we have here is Odin as master of the mysteries through self-sacrifice. And the symbols that are used within the Elder Futhark for spell work, or modern terms divination, and the written words are the rune staves themselves. The runes work in a similar manner to the Greek stoichia, and have a fourfold nature, with a shape, a sound, a numerical value, and the essence of that mystery itself. Whilst all aspects are useful in some magical application, it's the essence of the mystery that is the most powerful in terms of development of the self. As subjective mysteries, they have a direct impact upon us as individuals, much as the tarot or the Kabbalah would do. The three major rune poems all reflect a localized subjective interpretation of those mysteries, and we find references to local animals, weather patterns, or historic development of tools within such. The key to understanding those mysteries is to grasp those three poems and then meditate upon the runes themselves and form your own understanding, the core of what resonates with you. And this is how the rune becomes one with you and may work within you. And this is the application of the rune as a key to the mysteries that lay beyond. The typical representation of the runes is as a Futhark, named after the first letters of the runes there. And they are aligned in sets of 8 called Ets. 3 Ets give 24 runes of the Elder Futhark. 3 as an alignment is perhaps very important within Norse mythology, certainly cosmology. The common depiction of the Norse world tree Yggdrasil is in 3 planes or levels. And what we find here is perhaps some semblance of that within the structuring of the runes into Ets. The Elder Futhark is perhaps simplified today and used as a linguistic tool. But the most common historic usage of it has been in magical rune carvings, always signed by the Vitki, and with some element of encoding that requires a decryption. Whereas, as we say, the later Futharks largely for linguistic use in terms of the Latinization of the alphabet, and they have been expanded as such. It's the runes of the Elder Futhark that are essential enough and powerful enough for Odin to sacrifice himself upon Yggdrasil for. Is these that demand our focus. As Odin had to sacrifice himself upon the world tree to gain the runes and reach down to grasp them, then the origin of the runes must lay outside of Yggdrasil, outside of Odin, outside of the Aesir gods, outside of the Vanir that have become allies of the Aesir. The runes are thus external to the ordered cosmology of Yggdrasil. External to the extent that Odin required the initiatory experience, maybe even of symbolic or actual death, in order that his consciousness could transcend. Interestingly, within Norse cosmology, there are a number of beings that are found outside and external to Yggdrasil, the most powerful of which are likely to be the Norn, the 3 Norn that are likely to be the same as the 3 fates of classical Greek mythology. These are the weavers of word, the fabric of fate. First amongst them we have Earth, who weaves that which has been, as we would interpret it. And then we have Vithandi, who weaves that which is coming into being in our experience. And then finally Skuld, who weaves that which is likely to come into being, or likely to happen, and ultimately cuts the thread of our experience, our lives. The structure perhaps fits with the presiding understanding of past, present, future as a chronological progression of time. and also perhaps links to the notions of progression within beings such as the Maiden Mother Crone, or Gullveig-Freyja-Frigg, or Parvati Durga Kali, representing such a linear progression. It should be stated, however, that realistically all known weave concurrently. The past is occurring at the same time as the possible future in our experience of the present. An idea that we find support for within quantum physics and the theory of non-linear time. The known predate even the existence of the ancient Jotun, including Odin, meaning that the known are perhaps some of the eldest and most powerful wights in all Norse mythology, especially given that all of the gods are even subject to the fates decreed by the known, as witnessed when Frigg is unable to prevent the death of Balder. As quantum theory dictates, an aspect of that may imply that our flow of time is essentially non-linear other than our experience. We perceive a series of events that gives us a sequential understanding, which creates the illusion of linearity. For ease, it's best to imagine the web of word as a giant tapestry. Our daily experience in the manifest world is of this. We're seeing our immediate subjective reality. If we widen our approach, the reality is this is what we're looking at. As we step back and gain some perspective, we realise where we fit into what we perceive as being the world at present. As we gain more perspective, perhaps as Odin does by hanging and sacrificing himself externally upon Yggdrasil, what we see is that we're just a tiny part of a giant tapestry being woven concurrently, past, future and present, shifting all around us. It's the absence of an origin mythology for the Norn themselves that is perhaps most interesting. Like Gullveig, the Norn have a power that's seemingly beyond the abilities of even Odin. The actions of Frigg, as we say, were unable to even change what they had decreed to happen to Balder. Once the Norn have decreed a major event will occur, it's seemingly unshiftable. But that's not to say that the tiny, minute details of everyday life are as woven by the Norn. They perhaps record those aspects, but they're concerned with the major plot, not the intricate details of the subplot. We find further support for the preeminent role of the Norn in the acceptance of fate that the gods themselves take into battle at Ragnarok, knowing full well how they will die, in what battle. They do not shy from it. Perhaps in respect to the honour that we mentioned earlier, and the acceptance of that. It's perhaps a stoic acceptance on the part of the Esser gods especially, that there is a predetermined future for them, and they know that whatever they do in life will ultimately lead them to that point. So there is no notion of avoiding it. It will ultimately occur.
So do you not believe in free will then?
As I say, the Norn's major plot, certain events are predestined. The intricate details of where we have an element of free will to act within that constraint. It goes within Hinduism, it's the notion of dharmic law, the divine law of what must happen.
So is that yes or no?
Free will to an extent. It's a very finite detail.
Do you believe in predestination?
Do I deem that I am important enough that the Norn have predestined me? Hopefully. I believe so. There's only one way to know for sure. But I also believe that I have free will, that the Norn are not making me be here today. The Norn are not making me do what I will do tomorrow, or take the journey that I will take on the way home.
Somewhat paradoxical, surely.
It's to do otherwise would be sheer arrogance to assume that one would be so important that the Norn Out of 8 billion people on this existence of time, and all of the deities, all of the whites, the Jotun, are concerned with what I'm going to have to eat when I get home tonight. Lacking from the body of Norse mythology is any myth that hints at the origin of the runes themselves. As we say, it's only possible to assume that they're external to Yggdrasil and of non-Assyric or non-Vannic origin. Although it's feasible that they lie as origin within the Jotun themselves, given the bravado and boasting that occurs when the Jotun tend to encounter Odin and Thor, one would likely that the Jotun would jump at the opportunity to boast about having something so powerful and mysterious that the great Odin needed to sacrifice himself to gain it. As there is no such tale, it's only fair to assume that Odin doesn't, that mythology is not in existence. It's not the way it occurred, and the origin is not within the Jotun. And Odin is aware of this. Certainly there are other tales that are inferred or referenced within many of the existent mythologies that suggest occurrences and sagas that have been lost to antiquity. And we can only guess as to what the content of those were, but there's no inference to the origin of the runes. Rather than proceed through a full analysis of the 24 runes of the Elder Thuthark, it's perhaps more useful to look at how they directly interact with the self as an initiatory path, certainly within a left-hand path context. Those familiar with tarot probably experienced the process of meditation and sequencing of the major arcana to create a journey of an alchemical nature. The mysteries described by the runic poems and represented within the rune staves describe such a process. The process that follows provides the keys to the mystery within the self. Again, these are just guidelines or signposts on the path. That path through the forest is entirely subjective. These are just those little coloured arrows guiding perhaps as to where the thought may occur as you try to imbue the runes with a power within the self. It's also perhaps relevant given the way in which the runes are grasped and brought into life will alter one's being, as they did with Odin. The decision to work with symbols of mystery that are this powerful, powerful enough certainly to lure Odin into an act of self-sacrifice is inherently going to have a change upon your own life. So as I said earlier, the presentation of the Elder Thuthark is commonly within 3 Ets. Heather?
Are you not somewhat perturbed by the fact that all SS officers were required to study the runes?
No, because that was largely based on Carl Maria Willigut's work, and he adjusted them based on Liszt's work. And I think certainly any tool is suitable for propaganda manipulation. And although the likes of Willigut may have had esoteric interest in the runes, certainly the SS as a whole wouldn't have done. Only within a very small circle, as you have higher degrees, will you get the rituals of the Black Sun, etc. within the SS. And I don't think the associations of something in the 20th century should deter from use of something that is a core mystery, a core truth of a Platonic scale, perhaps representing the mysteries that lie beyond the cave of Plato. So what I'm presenting here is the viewing of the Ets, the 3 Ets, the ordering of the 24 runes of the Elder Thuthark, as individual stages of initiation. Each step being a mark of a rune upon the process, each Et representing a phase in itself. So the top image there, that's barely visible, I'm sorry I didn't realise the black on white would be so poor on the projector, is the common ordering of the runes in the Ets there. And what is most common is to have Othala, the ancestral inheritance, as the final rune. What is below is a proposed reordering that just changes the 23rd and 24th runes so that we have daggers as a symbol that looks very similar to the infinity symbol representing the remanifestation. In simplest interpretation, it's the new beginning, the new day, but it is also the continual cycle of becoming. As they stand, the first Et as a phase suggests an initial assigned value in Feu, primitive life and instinct in Urus, that has the potential, achieved by overcoming the challenge of Seeress, and is shaped and inspired by answers to further itself as it ventures in Wraitho forth towards the waymarker flame, the beacon of Kenas, where the gift of Gibu, a glory in the achievement of the grand strategic goal, the teleological purpose of Wunjo, awaits. As you progress down onto the second Et, what is suggested here is a remanifestation, the destruction and renewal of Hagalas, in accordance with the need, the labour required to attain that which is desired of Nauthius, to overcome the challenges, the treachery of the challenge of Isa before the self. To overcome this challenge manifests the reward, reaping the benefits of earlier hard work in Yera, whereby the individual fully understands the material and spiritual worlds, the union along the axis mundi of Ewas, with respect to the unknown final destiny or dharmic teleology of the individual, the secrets of word embodied in the lot cup of Perfro. Such a secret obviously requires earnest protection of algis, of the seed, until it manifests beyond a sapling stage and is mature and able to fend off challenges, until rationalized mind is subject to the flash of inspiration of Sewilo as to the individual's teleology. The third Et and the final Et then shows the process of a courageous, through the karmic strength of Tiwa's rebirth, and the remanifestation of the individual self through Bacano, as a component in union with all aspects of the self, an active partnership engaged with others and the self represented in Ewas, in society, Manas, where the organic growth, lagos, of the inner potential, the original teleological seed of sapience that is Ingwas, leads to the remanifestation of the self, the continual cycle of becoming that is the Heraclitean flux of Dagas, in accordance with that which has been, the inheritance of being an Orlog that is Ophala. So the proposed reordering has a marginal change and implication upon the Et, the final Et especially. The significance of such a reordering is that of man's origin as a simple and functional component of the animal kingdom, and the inherent entelechy of man's being, realized only through a continual process of alchemical remanifestation, through a change thrust upon man, the acquirement of the ability to evolve beyond the mere physical needs to facilitate survival. Man begins the journey towards his potential. The process, sometimes painful and destructive in remanifestation of the self, as the transcendent mind begins to understand what has been, what may be, and where the fullest potentiality of the mind may lay, although the final destiny of the individual will remain unknown. The process of remanifestation and evolution of the self then continues as the individual grows powerful, both internally and externally, because of their construction upon their own ability with each subsequent remanifestation. A manifest addition upon that which was. The final remanifestation sees it all begin again, the reincarnation, unless the individual can and chooses to close out the process of rebirth. We find this process within many initiatory schools, especially with those on a focus on Western alchemy or even tantric yoga. Reversal of the daggers and Athala runes also provides the significant journey of initiatory experience. It bears an immense similarity to the archetypal hero journey, the Sigurd journey, where the hero ventures into the ground to gain insight and power and returns greater than they were at the start of their experience. We find this within tales like Sigurd and in Beowulf, and is replicated within the initiatory trials of young pubescent males in certain Amazonian tribes, where a cave may be used and they are abandoned only to be scared into awakening after the morning. The mysteries within these poems and this journey that I put here is also within the book, the runes, the mystery keys, is one that's subjective, and it will alter differently for each individual who takes this journey. Especially if you think of the context of Freyju as wealth, there are different types of wealth and what we each place a value on. We find all of the mysteries then open to our own subjective interpretation. The initiatory pathway ultimately takes many forms. Just by thinking outside the box and being open to come to meetings such as the ones here at New Horizons, you're already on that path to some degree. In seeking the runes alone, you may venture forth in pursuit of your own beacon of Kenas that is leading to your ultimate glory, your ultimate entelechy. Even at the remanifestation of daggers at the end of the reordered series there, the process merely resets and begins. It's a never-ending journey. There is no one who is complete. Even Odin never ceases the pursuit of wisdom, testing himself, seeking out wise beings throughout the worlds. It's a fallacy to think that you know everything, you've experienced everything. There is always more. Odin embodies this, much as Socrates does within Plato's Apology. You are always and eternally your own cycle. This reordering is perhaps bore out by an application of the runic triads, especially to the reordered the final the change of Athala and Dagas. And if you read the runes in terms of triads, as circled there, so Freyju, Hagalas, Tiwas, you find that they bear out this journey of remanifestation and support the theory, the reordering there. It's quite a lengthy detail, so I won't go into this as we're already running over. But certainly if you do to investigate the runes, it's worth looking beyond the individual runes and looking in terms of their dyads and their adjacent runes and how they interact, and also within this aspect of the triads. Again, the aspect of free and the immense significance of that. It's worth investigating for yourself, and I think you'll find it opens up a new way of working with the runes for yourself. I delve into the triads in a bit more depth that we've got time for within Runes and Mystery Keys, and I touch more on aspects of Odin in terms of the left-hand path and the morality and application of the left-hand path to the individual within the left hand of Odin. Both are available online through various sellers. I've got copies here with me today. I'll hang around for a while at the end if anybody wants to ask questions one-on-one. But if we've got time for a few questions now, if there's anything anyone wants to posit in front.
Do you know you said about praying?
Yes.
And that you would need to give something back in order for something to happen. Well, it depends who you're praying to, doesn't it? If you're praying to Lucifer, like you're referring to with Odin, you need to sacrifice and you need to do stuff like that to give something back. If you're praying to a creator god, something that can create, rather than something that an architect. Lucifer is the architect. He takes and he remolds and he can change things that way. But if you're praying to a creator god, something that can create things, then you don't need to give anything. You don't need to sacrifice things. You don't need to. Satanism goes into sacrificing goats, and as far as people as well.
I think you will find that many aesthetic Satanists may hold the notions of sacrifice to be true. Certainly when you get into the more intellectual realms of satanic groups, aspects like the Temple of Set or the Order of Apep, the notions of sacrifice and prayer are absolute no-go areas. There is no supplication to any deity. It's responsibility for the self, rather than beseeching any other form of deity or being for assistance.
Yeah, but that doesn't, just because you're praying, it doesn't get rid of personal responsibility.
It does when you're seeking for external interference to assist you.
No, it depends on what you're praying for, doesn't it?
I don't think that I could pray to Odin and not have him smack me on a metaphysical level.
Perhaps that's a proof that you're praying to the wrong god.
I don't pray. As an adherent to the left-hand path,
do you practice black magic?
I do practice black magic as defined by Michael Aquino.
Can you explain that to me then?
It's the theurgy of the self. It's the continual becoming, the pushing of the boundaries to develop the consciousness. It's intellectual and spiritual supremacy. It's the aristocracy of the soul.
That's not black magic. Black magic is ritual.
That's within a Abrahamic context. That's taking Solomonic magic and all of the grimoires that are held to be black magic that are written by Christian monks who were bored and justifying their existence when there were no more Bibles to copy out that week.
Thanks for a fascinating talk. It was really very interesting. I just wanted to know what you thought about the parallels between the runes, the Kabbalah, tarot, alchemy. We seem to have had all of these master forms of divination left behind for us by someone springing up all over the world. And I just wanted to know what your take on was, perhaps how we got hold of these. Did we invent them? Were they left behind from a previous age or world? Or were they given to us by some form of higher being?
The way I tend to view them is that they're much as certain agencies in the world will leave a cryptic puzzle as a recruitment tool. And I think these are different relativistic encrypted puzzles to find the people of the right mindset that are being sought for a certain role or teleological purpose. And they are almost a sieve to siphon off certain degrees of consciousness away from other forms of being. And they're in a relativistic form. So you may have encoded hieroglyphics. You may have ultimately the tarot that may or may not be linked back to Egypt on a certain degree. And they are archetypal mysteries, and they have such a symmetry, and you can draw the parallels between them because they're all alluding to the same thing. It's just their geospatial-temporal relativism that is defining their form. So the tarot is essentially getting at the same mysteries as the runes, as is the Kabbalah. They're all paths to the same truth.
Sorry, one more question.
Do you think in Western alchemy, when it talks about the concept of the peacock's tail, that this is the realization that perhaps someone realizes that there might be something there, and suddenly there's this? Do you go with the runes, the tarot, the Kabbalah? Is that what the peacock's tail is?
I think there's two possible ways to read the peacock's tail in alchemy. It may be in inference to Ahura Mazda as a deity, Zoroastrian. But then there is also absolutely it's the confusion tactic, not knowing where to focus on, so you never actually get in depth because you're looking at too many things. Having worked with the runes for 10 years in depth and done very little else, I have pretty confident approach into my understanding of the runes in terms of their relation to me, and it certainly has been worked on a subjective and objective level. But now I'm starting to draw those other investigations in to see how they can further my understanding of the runes, not to replace them.
They all work together. It's amazing how much they support each other. In fact, I think it's only by studying them all will you believe in one.
Yeah. Yeah, I think you can take the three Ets of the Elder Futhark and you could align them along the three pillars of the Kabbalah. And as I've done there in the journey, I've taken inspiration from the major arcana of the tarot and looked for a similar process within the ordering of the Ets. They're the same mysteries, whereas I have a runic understanding of those mysteries. The other applications and approaches can definitely shape and help your understanding. Yeah.
Can I just thank you for the work you put into your presentation? It was fantastic.
Thank you.
In the first part of the presentation, you mentioned Muspel and the idea of a firmament, and you didn't really go into it, so this might be a bit unfair. But I suppose you've got an idea from Norse mythology of the reality of this plane that we live on. And you also, in the second part of the presentation, were quite forthright in your condemnation of NASA. Now, am I reading something into what you were saying, or am I getting it wrong?
I have a view of it's influenced by Norse cosmology. I align the worlds of Yggdrasil along causal planes, so of Muspel, of Niflheim, of Vanaheim as a mechanistic cycle of nature, and the potentiality of the quantum states of Jotunheim, of chaos, where everything could happen. And I call that the causal plane. And upon that, that's where I hold the structuring of Ymir's remains as being applied through the conscious beings of Odin Gullveig-Freyja-Frigg. So what I picture, and I hold that the Norse mythology especially is telling us, and you get some aspects of this as within Hindu mythology and Egyptian mythology especially, is that there is an overarching dome. And I think that's within Norse mythology in that context, it's Ymir's skull. That is space as we see it. It is a dome. And then I hold that the firmament essentially is a dome within a dome. And what we think of as deity, I have rapidly over the years come to the conclusion that this is, if you think in terms of Plato's cave, where what we see is shadows of reality. And the archetypes are external to the cave. What I think are the archetypal deities are essentially the shadows that influence our world. But I do not hold that Odin, Gullveig, Thor reside within the truth of the cosmology. I think that they are within a cave and we're within that cave. So the cosmology of Yggdrasil, for instance, is the archetypal cave. And it's external to the cave that we find the runes, or the Norn, or Nithog, or Ratatosk, the beings that have no origin myth. And I think these are the Platonic truth, the metaphysical reality that lies beyond even what we deem to be the archetypes that influence our reality. In terms of what I think you're getting to is mythology in support of a debunking of NASA mythology and towards support of aspects of what is commonly called the flat earth theory, then yes, because that's just a cave, that's just a shadow on the wall that NASA show. It's a puppet show.
So what would you say was NASA's rationale for what they're doing?
If somebody has seen outside of our cave and seen what is causing the shadows of our reality as we perceive it, it may be so mind-altering or ego-shattering, profound impact upon society as a whole, that it's easier to carry on a shadow puppet show and portray that rather than show the truth.
We agree on that.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you all.